Welcome to Vacations for Canadians, the podcast. We've got the experience and expertise to help you travel smarter, dream bigger, and make your next vacation unforgettable. Now let's talk about it.
Imagine this. You land in Barbados. The air is warm. Steel drums are playing somewhere nearby. You grab a rum punch before even seeing your ship. No U.S. border lines, no crowded Florida terminals. You're already immersed in the Caribbean before you even step on board.
Hi everyone, today's episode is all about Caribbean cruises that start and end outside of the United States, why they're growing in popularity, who they're perfect for, and why many travelers don't even realize these exist. I'm Tina Dowd, owner of Vacations for Canadians, and today we're talking about something more and more Canadians are starting to consider: Caribbean cruises that don't start or end in the United States. So, what does that mean? Cruising beyond the U.S. shores. What does it actually mean? Cruises that begin and end outside of the U.S. are becoming increasingly popular with Canadian travelers. We're talking about home ports like Barbados, Cartagena, Colombia, Colón, Panama, Guadeloupe, Martinique, St. Martin, and more. Now, obviously, the majority of Caribbean cruises still depart from major U.S. ports like Miami or Port Canaveral. They move massive volumes of passengers through these ports every week. But when you sail from a non-U.S. port, you're dealing with smaller terminals, less congestion, faster boarding and disembarkation, and fewer ships leaving that same day. And it definitely feels different right away. Southern and Eastern Caribbean sailings from these ports often visit 5 to 7 islands with fewer sea days. These islands are geographically closer together, so you spend more time exploring and less time sailing. Some of our clients describe these as more relaxed, cultural, immersive, and definitely less mass-marketed. Now let's talk about ship style and size. It's an important distinction. These routes are not usually operated by those giant, brand new mega ships with roller coasters and 10-story water slides. You are more likely to find mid-size ships, boutique ships, premium and luxury cruise lines, and yes, European cruise brands, particularly in the French Caribbean. For some travelers, that's a drawback, but for many, it's exactly the point. Mid-size ships mean fewer passengers, shorter lines, easier navigation, and there's a lot more focus on destinations. Think less floating theme park and more Caribbean journey. And these ships have a different onboard atmosphere too. Cruises starting outside of the U.S. often attract a more international mix of travelers. So think multiple languages on board, later dining times, a calmer evening vibe, and definitely less short party weekend sailings. It's subtle, but it definitely shifts the energy and the experience of the cruise. So if you've cruised out of Miami 5 times already, it might be time to switch your playlist. Now, you're probably thinking, who is this perfect for? Well, these cruises aren't for everyone, but for the right traveler, they're exceptional. They're going to be ideal for Canadians who prefer to travel outside of the U.S. or experienced cruisers who've already done the whole Florida thing, for those culture-focused travelers, or clients wanting to combine cruise and land stays, and travelers who are comfortable flying internationally before cruising. We've had clients who were hesitant at first. Florida feels easy, familiar, but once they tried Barbados or Cartagena, they came back saying it felt like the Caribbean they'd always imagined. Less crowded islands, more unique itineraries, and the feeling of being immersed in the culture before the cruise even began. Sometimes, honestly, this hesitation isn't about difficulty. It's just about doing something different. Now let's talk about what I think is the secret advantage: pre-cruise stays. Here's where these itineraries can really shine. When you fly into Miami, the goal is usually to get on the ship as quick as possible. But when you fly into Colón, Panama, Barbados, or Martinique, the departure city becomes part of your vacation. So what I often recommend to clients is an extra 2 nights in Old Town San Juan, or a beachfront boutique stay in Barbados, or even exploring those French markets and cafes in Martinique. Now your cruise isn't just a cruise, it's a layered vacation. You're getting a cruise plus cultural immersion, and that's something traditional U.S. departures don't always offer in the same way. There's a practical advantage also worth mentioning, that is weather and season strategy. Another reason some travelers choose Southern Caribbean departures is weather. Ports like Aruba sit so far south, they are outside of the main hurricane belt. Many Southern Caribbean itineraries operate heavily in winter and early spring for that reason. Obviously, nothing guarantees perfect weather, but geographically, it can be a smart strategy, especially if you're booking during shoulder season. So what makes people hesitate? Let's address the practical side. Flights. Yes, flights can be pricier than a quick trip to Florida, especially in peak winter. And yes, it does require planning. You're going to want to arrive at least one day early, build in those connection times, and choose routing carefully. Vacation roulette is not a strategy. And travel insurance. When you're combining flights, hotels, transfers, and cruise, insurance becomes even more important. And then there's language. In ports like Martinique or Guadeloupe, you may hear more French than English, but tourism infrastructure is strong and manageable, especially when you're properly prepared. This is where having someone like us guide the logistics makes a big difference. And that brings us to cost and value. Let's talk money, because this always comes up. Cruise fares themselves could be similar, sometimes even lower due to international competition. And you're also going to avoid those high pre-cruise hotel rates in the major U.S. ports. Yes, flights may cost more, but value isn't always about airfare. It's about more time in port, unique itineraries, a different onboard atmosphere, and a peace of mind. So what does this actually look like in real life? Here are some sample itineraries so you know what to expect. Let's make this practical. When people hear cruises that don't start in the US, it can sound complicated. It's not. Here's what they actually look like. Southern Caribbean from Barbados. Stops can include St. Lucia, Antigua, Martinique, Grenada, St. Kitts, and even St. Vincent. Because these islands are so close together, you're less time sailing and more time exploring. Clients say this itinerary feels lush, scenic, and beautifully balanced. It's ideal for couples and experienced cruisers who want beauty without big port chaos. Another one of our favorites is Eastern Caribbean round trip from San Juan. Yeah, technically a U.S. territory, but still very different from Florida departures. Add on 2 nights in Old San Juan, colorful streets, historic forts, incredible food. Then sail to islands like St. Thomas, St. Martin, St. Croix, Dominica, and Barbados. It's familiar enough to feel comfortable, but different enough to feel special. This is great for families, multi-generational travel, and first-time non-Florida cruisers. Then there's Caribbean and Panama Canal, from Cartagena or Colón, Panama, for travelers wanting something memorable. Some of these itineraries include a partial Panama Canal transit, and watching the ship move through the locks is one of those quiet, unforgettable moments. Often combined with Costa Rica, Aruba, and Curacao, these cruises feel less like a quick getaway and more like a Caribbean journey. And no matter which itinerary you choose, these cruises offer more time in port, fewer sea days, smaller or premium ships, a more international passenger mix, and a less rushed atmosphere. But they do require more thoughtful planning. But the payoff is significant. If your cruises are starting to feel predictable, this might be your sign to look beyond those U.S. shores. Because sometimes where your cruise starts changes everything. Cruising beyond U.S. shores isn't about making things complicated. It's about being intentional. Travel isn't just about where you go. It's about how it feels from the moment you land. If you're curious about exploring the Caribbean without starting in the U.S., let's talk. My team and I specialize in designing these kinds of journeys so they're seamless, exciting, and truly yours. That's it. Thanks for joining us today on Vacations for Canadians, the podcast. Make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcast so you don't miss our next episode. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with more real travel advice to help you plan your next great getaway. May your seas be calm and your adventures endless. See you next time.